Good evening, everyone. And this is actually going to be more of an informal set of reviews that I had planned on pursuing. Well, a lot of things happened in between, so I suppose better late than never. And if you want to see more of these formal reviews on these books, then you could head over to the TCA channel, which I believe will be on this point. So, this is the book that I've been reading lately, From Hindi to Urdu, A Social and Political History by Tariq Rahman. And it's an Oxford University Press publication, and it describes the historical precedents as a result of which we had the languages Hindi and Urdu, the overall political background to them, how the scripts had evolved, why Hindi itself became very Sanskrit driven, so very Devanagari script, very Sanskrit words, and how in contrast Urdu drove itself towards Arabic and Persian, and so it became very Persianized, very Arabicized in its format, and how as a result of the partition we basically have these two separate entities, Hindi and Urdu, in the literary and linguistic context, even though both languages are mutually intelligible in their base level, in their community level, in their non-literary, non-political, non-flowery formats. And Tariq Rahman does a substantially decent job in this book. It's quite thick, and it's a very good introduction for those who actually want to understand the general schisms between the two languages in the context of India and Pakistan, and how the two countries actually weaponize their own languages, and as a result of this weaponization, how their histories were actually evolved into what they are today. Overall, though, it's a very substantial read for sure. The best part about the book itself is that both the Hindi and the Urdu, as well as the Farsi roots, are provided in it, not just in terms of the paragraphs which were referenced, but also their actual script in the context of the quotes which were given. There are a total of about 15 chapters in it, and overall it's about 447 pages, at least in the table of contents, but if you include the index, then it's 456 pages overall. So roughly about 500 pages if you also count in the Roman numeral chapters, and it's quite good. So it provides the context for the how the languages themselves how the proto languages were actually formed, since there was Hindutva, there was a language which was used as a koine within the context of the subcontinent, because you need to keep in mind that the subcontinent had a lot of areas in it. So you not only have the KP province, the modern day KP province, which was basically at the time a part of Afghanistan. It considered itself a part of Afghanistan, even though it is an independent culture. For more reference to it, you can read Sir Olaf Caro's book, The Pathan, and other similar historiographies in that context. The corpus which Tariq Rahman used in order to explain the roots of Urdu and how it actually became known as the language of the Muslims, if you will. Because you need to keep in mind that even though it is the national language in Pakistan, in India it is only spoken in select areas which are Muslim majority, and over there it serves more as an identity function. Far more so because they are a minority over there, the Muslims that are present in India. They're a minority relative to the Sanskrit driven Hindi language. Although Urdu is a protected language as far as the Constitution of India is concerned, as far as its legislative structure is concerned, Sanskrit itself and Hindi in general, because of the overall schisms between the two countries, and especially because of radicalization within Pakistan, it was seen as more of more of an us them dichotomy. So Hindi is their language, not our language, if you want to pardon the communist reference over here. So just to take an example over here, just to essentially explain how that context came in. This nationalist claim over Urdu is nothing new. Jamil Jalebi, who has been referred to earlier, dedicated a chapter to Urdu in the areas of Pakistan in his two-volume Tarikh-e-Adab-e-Urdu, published in 1975, and more specifically the chapters page numbers are 593 to 712. And another author, who at the time of writing was a colonel in the Pakistan army, clearly states that the theories that Urdu was born in the regions now in Pakistan is a source of joy, because these are the areas which are witnessing its youth. Moreover, he also expressed gratification that Urdu was born in military cantonments and that his purpose, spreading the use of Urdu in the army, is thereby facilitated. Khan, 1989, pages 11 and 12 of his article. Although interesting enough, it also provides a route for how Urdu, as the word Urdu actually, how it came to be. So if we go over to the chapter of names. The name Urdu, first used only around 1780 by the poet Ghulam Hamadani Mushafi, 1750 to 1824, itself biases the user or hearer into assumptions about its identity which are implicitly and in the final analysis political. The word is from Turkish and refers to camp, a military cantonment or a place of the residence of the elite. Urdu-e-Mualla. It is associated with theories that the language was born in the Mughal military camps because military life necessitated the interaction of Muslims and Hindus. Such associations tend to disown at least 400 years of history of the language when it was called, according to Shamsur Rahman Farooqi, roughly in that order, Hindwi, Hindi, Dilabi, Gujri, Dakani or Dakkani, and Rekhta. Amir Khosrow, 1253 to 1325, in his Masnavi Nuh Sepir, published in 1318, says that each province of the India of his day had a distinctive language which is not derived or borrowed from any other, and then mentions the following languages: Sindhi o Lahori o Kashmiri o Kabar, Dhor Samandri o Talangi o Gujar, Ma Abari o Gori o Bengal o Abad, Delhi o Peraminash Andar Hama Had, E Hima Hindwist ke za ayam Kohan, Ama Bakar Asht Bahar Guna Sukhan. And the last three lines mean Delhi and its environs. It is Hindi since ancient times, which is used ordinarily for all kinds of conversations. And this is just from chapter 2, which is about the names itself. It goes on further into even talking about the first English colonizers when they started speaking the language over here, and how they integrated the language itself within the context of their daily correspondence. So if we go over to that particular portion, we have, Urdu as the language of love, which Urdu as a language of love actually also talks about the controversial aspects in the sense that there was erotic content in it, and I'm just going to read one of the footnotes on it, on why it was considered controversial and why the Islamicate perspective tended to take more root in contrast to the romantic elements overall. even though Hindi and Sanskrit in general does not have any issues with it. As far as I've read within this book, and even in the context of Bollywood songs, which are in the majority of cases Hindi, although there are Tamil songs as well, there are non-Hindi language movies within the context of Bollywood as well, and they use the whole romantic angle in order to explicate upon that matter of the heart, if you will. So this footnote says, in the context of the Urdu and how its association with love was disassociated, quite literally and metaphorically, European translators of the Masnavi, the one which was written by Jalaluddin Rumi, was so embarrassed by the erotic content of some of the fables that Nicholson, who translated it in English between 1925 to 1940, rendered them 133 out of 25 or 700 couplets in Latin so that only a few scholars could have access to them. He considered them too outspoken for our taste, but now that they are no longer suitable for Europe, they are not acceptable in Pakistan. Even in 1956, when the Pakistani scholar Afzal Iqbal started writing his book on Rumi, he was anxious to defend Rumi on the possible charge of sensuality. See Iqbal 1956. And regarding the thing which I said about how the colonizers, the English, how they adapted the language itself, it's interesting that the majority of the references which are given within this book about the books which were written by the British in order to teach their civil servants, both during the East India Company time and after the area came under British jurisdiction as British India. And it is true that the summary of it is essentially that those people, those officers, those civil servants, even those tourists who came over to these parts of the land, they spoke in an imperative second person perspective. So more barking orders rather than polite, nuanced company. This is not always true. Most of the ambassadors to the Nawabs and to the Sultans and to the Rajas spoke the highest form of it. They knew what the declensions meant. They knew the grammar in the context of how diplomatic and courtly transactions need to be undertaken. And in that context, it is interesting that some of the imperatives which are provided over here as examples, while it is true that they tended to be lambasted by the general community overall, and it gave to the stereotype of the Gora Sahib, if you will. There is a bit of a bias over here, and before going over to the criticisms that I have of this book, I will refer to this one paragraph. It was written on 31st March 1621, and it's by Robert Hughes, who was working in a factory in Patna. So it's what we call Hinglish, which we've actually come to adopt within the youth of those people in Pakistan who use Urdu but using the Romanized alphabet. Whether they're fluent in it or not, they tend to adapt English in the context of their conversations but write Urdu because they can't find the word in English, so they use Urdu in that conversation. And it is seen in most of the conversations you will find between those who are from India and those who are from Pakistan in an international setting, and whenever they're conversing with each other. So they code switch significantly between English and the native language that they speak, albeit in a very basal form, not the literary form. This particular paragraph, a terrible fear kindled, which having a consumed all those parties by the force of a strong ondi, break into the city, and within the space of 2 grise came into the very heart thereof, where our abode is. हुए being environed with neighboring chopers. And in this particular paragraph, Ondi or Andhi, and we have Greece or Gharis, which was actually a unit of time, a very antiquated term, which isn't used that often, although it is utilized in the context of very hyper literary Urdu, whether it be historical context or whether it be very very historiographic fan fiction as written by those who assume they know history, but in reality they're just writing propaganda and narratives in general. And we have another word, chapar, which still exist. They still exist within the villages of Sindh in Pakistan, as well as in most of the rural areas of Rajasthan and some portions of North India. There are some criticisms which I have to highlight as far as this book is concerned. One of them is that the book does not refer to the Christian contributors in Pakistan of Urdu. And when I say Christian, I refer to the natives who were born and raised Christian here in Pakistan, and Christians born and raised in India who actually spoke Urdu and indeed were conversant in the language itself. It doesn't refer to them in this book, which is a shame. It's something which I view as a bias, and one where it overshadows some of the very profound research that Tariq Rahman has done in this book. And I respect him. I respect this book. It is a far better book than this other novel. I would call it a novel, even though he says it's historical. It is not at all. The gentleman in question is someone whose name I forget, nor do I want to actually bother remembering. He wrote in Urdu, and it's a very biased perspective. In fact, there are issues of multiple authors who are ghostwriting on behalf of the actual author himself, and they don't provide succinct context. Whilst Tariq Rahman actually refers to the main contributors of Urdu such as Amir Khusro, Ghalib, Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, and so on, like everyone who has actually had a contribution to the language. I respect that. I feel, and this is my opinion, that's why I say I feel, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, that he does have an agenda which prevents him from including the Christian contributors to Urdu. And there were Christian contributors to the Urdu language. If you look at the community of the Christian community here in Pakistan, their hymns are sung in the form of qawwalis. In fact, most of their overall prayer structure and their Sunday sermons are in Urdu. That is a contribution of the Jesuit as well as the clergy who adapted Urdu and Hindi in order to reach into the communities themselves and essentially spread their message. Whilst the East India Company prevented them from doing so because they were not focused on that as a topic. They were not interested in it as a topic. They were not interested in it as a platform. Their only focus was business. Their only focus was to gain as much resource as possible from India itself. And in that context, I feel that it is a shortcoming within the book itself. Another shortcoming is that the Urdu contributors from the English side, especially the ones who actually took it upon themselves to provide context, to provide an understanding of the language, is limited solely to those who had a biased perspective. And I say this because there are archive.org documents, archive.org being the major open access resource on the internet from where you can download these books, which are uploaded over there by the Public Library of Delhi. So you can read these books in order to learn the language. Even provide context if you want to revise, say, Persian, or if you want to know what the language is that the people of the Punjab or Sindh and so on, how they spoke, how they wrote the language, and so on. And in that context, most of those books are above board, especially if you want to go into the grammar, and if you want to have a very nitty gritty approach to it. And it is ironic that he criticizes them, because as far as Urdu is concerned, even though he says that it is a living language and there are contributions made into it in the media, in radio, in the context of the Commission for the Promotion of Urdu as a national language, he only refers to the East Pakistan East Pakistan's separation into becoming independent Bangladesh twice, maximum 3 or 4 times. He only refers to Bengali being subjugated in the context of Urdu as the primary language twice within the book itself. And furthermore, when he describes how the Islamization of the language resulted in scripts upon scripts upon scripts of commentaries, on criticisms, on perspectives, on guidance, and overall jurisprudence corpuses written in Urdu, he does not refer to how that has impacted the overall politics and the realpolitik in Bangladesh, where he only refers to the Bengali community, the very Islamic driven Bengali community, as using Urdu, notwithstanding the fact that in Bangladesh they do speak Bengali. It is their national language. And that is a criticism from my side as far as that management is concerned, the management of that entire narrative. And again, this is an opinion. I may be wrong, maybe I might have a bias in favor of a pan language or pan linguistic worldview, where all languages are upheld in equal worth and all languages have contributed significantly to our perspective and hence provide more of a globalist and mutually beneficial world. So, keeping that in mind, even with that criticism, I still recommend that you try this book out. It's well thought out, it's definitely well researched, and the index is very thorough. More to the point, it also provides an interesting perspective on the dialects of Urdu as well, and how these dialects tended to disagree with each other, or how these dialects came to influence the overall standard form that took precedence and hence became the standard that was used in the context of Islamic writings, which is true that there are a significantly larger number of publications in Urdu on Islamic jurisprudence, on Islamic theology, on the Islamic perspectives, and so on. So, keeping that in mind, I do agree with him that from Hindi to Urdu, there are separations happening in it. And I also agree with him that when it became the language of the elite, it disenfranchised the common man and empowered the elite at the cost of everyone else. And that is true. That is the reason why there is a limited fluency overall within Pakistan as far as the language is concerned. There are very few primary speakers of Urdu, those who speak Urdu as a primary language at home. The same goes for Hindi as well. In fact, both Hindi and Urdu do have that bottleneck as far as their overall structures are concerned, because he mentions in his book about how hyper-Sanskritization of Hindi resulted in school Hindi being separated from colloquial Hindi or spoken Hindi. And with that said, I repeat once more, I recommend this book, and I thank you for watching this video, and I hope that whenever you have time, you could just like this video, subscribe to the channel, and yeah, if you have any questions, just write them down in the comments. Cheers.